touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
Welcome into The Process, Crimson Tide Recruiting. I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on our YouTube page. This is Thursday's show. We are attempting to close out this week of shows with another fantastic one right here on our YouTube page. And while you are here, go ahead, hit that subscribe button below so you can stay updated on all of our content here at Touchdown Alabama magazine. The Process runs every Tuesday and Thursday evening right here on our YouTube page, so you are going to want to hit that subscribe button today. And on this episode, with the Tide and the Bulldogs set for a highly anticipated matchup on this weekend, I want to take a look at some key recruiting storylines surrounding this matchup, as these two go up against one another quite frequently on the recruiting trail. So I want to take a look at that on this episode of The Process. But before I dive deeper into that, I do want to touch you guys with a couple of crucial recruiting updates when it comes to the Crimson Tide. So with that being said, let's get the process started. We are going to get these recruiting updates started with five-star offensive lineman Amarius Mims announcing his commitment to the Georgia Bulldogs on Wednesday. This is not a huge blow to the Crimson Tide's 2021 recruiting class because they already have an impressive offensive line class verbally committed, especially when you look at the tackles they have committed in J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockmeyer, who are both 5 stars as well. And I talked about on the last episode of The Process that the Tide coaching staff will have to make some tough decisions in the coming months when it comes to this 2021 recruiting class, because when you look at the numbers, things are pretty tight here for the Tide here in this 2021 recruiting cycle. So Amarius Mims announced his commitment to the Georgia Bulldogs. You may see the Tide take a lot of focus off offensive linemen because they are recruiting some guys outside of Amarius Mims, so they may take a look at some other guys, some other positions to possibly fill their 2021 recruiting class up with. One of those positions is defensive end, and one of those guys who they are recruiting at that position is Thomas Adelier, who released a top 3 on yesterday. The Tide were included along with Texas A&M and the Florida Gators. Adelier was once verbally committed to the Ohio State Buckeyes. He decommitted from them, reopened his recruitment, and started to reevaluate things. Now he is down to 3 schools, with that being the Gators, the Aggies, and the Tide. He will most likely make a decision during the early signing period on National Signing Day. His commitment to the Buckeyes came out of nowhere, so we may see him do that. You never know with these recruits, so that is just something to keep your eyes out for when it comes to Adelier, who says he will announce his commitment during the early signing period on National Signing Day. To close out these set of recruiting updates, I do want to hit you guys with some information about a new recruiting prediction feature at touchdownalabama.com. We know Alabama fans love to make predictions, love to hear predictions of where the Tide currently stand in the recruitment of some of their top targets. In this new feature entitled Locks and Leans, you guys will be able to do that over at touchdownalabama.com. These predictions will be provided in a couple of categories. These categories are trending up, trending down, slight lean, medium lean, and heavy lean. Most will be subscriber only, but it will be a couple that are open to the public. You guys can read some inside info along with those predictions. In that inside info, when you click on the button, it will most likely direct you to a piece of content you can either read or watch that basically gives insight why we feel the Tide stands in that particular position with that particular recruit. So be sure to check out that new feature over at touchdownalabama.com. Now we are going to roll into a couple of key recruiting storylines, so circling around quite possibly the biggest game in college football this season. When you look at the Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide, it looks as if it is inevitable for both teams to face off against one another on the recruiting trail, with Amarius Mims, 5-star offensive lineman, here committing to the Bulldogs on Wednesday, being the latest chapter in this recruiting rivalry. And when you look at the 2021 recruiting class moving forward, there are a couple of guys who both schools will continue to recruit here for the rest of this 2021 recruiting cycle. And one of those guys is 4-star athlete Xavier Sori, who is currently playing his senior season at IMG Academy. When you look at Sori, he has a top 5 at the moment, which includes the Georgia Bulldogs along with the Crimson Tide. In my mind, I think the Georgia Bulldogs are in the second tier of these schools because of their special relationship that he currently has with the Tide's coaching staff. I think the Tide is the leader in Sori's recruitment. I think the teams in the second tier are the Georgia Bulldogs, the Florida Gators, along with the Auburn Tigers. I think LSU is kind of the long shot at the moment because they have not been able to develop a relationship with Sori, not very strongly because of the coronavirus and the impact that COVID-19 has had on the recruiting trail, with recruits not being able to visit campuses. They have not been able to build a great relationship with Sori, so that's why I feel that the Tigers are a long shot. But I think it is teams like Georgia, Florida, and Auburn who are making Sori's decision a lot more difficult. I think if he was to commit today, I think it would be the Crimson Tide. But you have teams like I said, the Gators, the Tigers, and the Bulldogs are still trying to recruit him very hard, so he still wants to evaluate all of his options before he has to make a decision in December, because he wants to sign during the early signing period and enroll early in the school of his choice in January. Another guy who both teams are recruiting very hard here in this 2021 recruiting cycle is the guy who I talk about a lot. I talk about Sori a lot on this show lately. I talk about Terrion Arnold as well, the guy who wants to play at the next level alongside Xavier Sori. He has the Georgia Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide included in a top 11 at the moment. He will cut his top school list down to a top 5 pretty soon. I'm pretty sure the Tide and the Bulldogs will be included in that top 5. The Georgia Bulldogs is a school he talks about a lot. You can just go back and look at the last couple of interviews I have did with Arnold. Every time I talk about just list of teams who are still recruiting you very hard. Georgia is always involved. Alabama is always involved. And when you look at Arnold's recruitment, his recruitment could carry out all the way through the early signing period, all the way to the traditional signing period in February. He may make an announcement during the All-American Bowl in January, but he may hold all the way off until February. I think he wants to take a visit, some type of visit, before he makes a decision. With the recruiting dead period being extended through January 1st, if he holds off and makes his decision in February, he could quite possibly take a visit to a school if the NCAA decides to lift the recruiting dead period after January 1st. So I think that is something that he is going to try to take a look at, try to take an official visit, some official visits, hopefully in January if he can, and try to evaluate all of his options before he makes that final decision. And I think that is one of the reasons he is cutting it to a final 5, because with a top 5, you can take 5 official visits. So Terrion Arnold is a guy who is being recruited by both the Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide. The last guy I will talk about today is Brian Thomas Jr., who has a top 4. Of course, Thomas is a 4-star wide receiver out of Louisiana. He has a top 4 of Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, and LSU. And when you look at Brian Thomas and when you look at the Crimson Tide's 2021 wide receiver class, this will be a great luxury for the Crimson Tide in my mind, because you have verbal commitments from wide receivers A.J. Hodge, Corey Brooks, and Christian Leary, who are very talented here in this 2021 recruiting cycle. You also pulled in 3 impressive wide receiver recruits in the 2020 recruiting class. When you look at Trayshawn Holden, Javon Baker, and Thaiu Jones-Bell, and when you look at those guys, neither one of them have been able to really take any snaps during this football season. So a red shirt is quite possible for all 3 of those guys with this SEC conference schedule going on in 2020. So that is just something to pay attention to as well. So I think a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., a 6'4" wide receiver with a lot of great athleticism and all-around type of wide receiver, would be a great pickup for the Tide here in this 2021 recruiting cycle. I don't feel that they need him, but he would be a great luxury in my mind. So I think the Tide is still right there involved in his recruitment, along with the Georgia Bulldogs and the home state school LSU Tigers. I think he is still giving Texas A&M a look as well. And if you are the Georgia Bulldogs, I think the fact that they have been a little bit successful with getting their wide receivers involved despite not having a great quarterback, despite not having an explosive offense. And if you are Brian Thomas Jr., you can look at a place like Georgia and say, yo, they are not in the best position at quarterback. They don't have the most explosive offense, but their wide receivers are getting involved. When you look at Kearis Jackson, George Pickens, and you look at their freshman tight end and Darnell Washington. But when you look at the Crimson Tide, what wide receiver, what quarterback group has been this successful so far this season? Just looking at Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, along with John Mechie, with Mac Jones throwing the ball to them. So it's a lot of different things going on when it comes to Brian Thomas Jr. and his recruitment. As I said, I think he will be a luxury for the Crimson Tide. He is involved in those tough decisions that I think the Tide's coaching staff will have to make over the next couple of months. So Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy to pay attention to, as the Bulldogs and the Tide are very involved in his recruitment. And as I said the last time I talked about recruiting storylines circulating a SEC matchup, when I talked about the Tide taking on Texas A&M, this game is even more critical for both teams because you get an opportunity to show what you can do against a top tier program. The Tide and the Bulldogs, I'm pretty sure, are taking that into account going into this matchup. Whoever wins, you can most definitely believe that they are going to use that on the recruiting trail for these three guys in particular. Say, yo, we know you are considering that school. Look what we did on the national stage against them. We are better than them during this season. If you come, you can help us continue to stay better than that particular program. The Crimson Tide have a lot to offer. They can show some improvements on the defensive side of the football. I actually got a chance to talk with Terrion Arnold after the Tide took on Ole Miss, and he told me that he was fairly confident that Nick Saban would turn things around this week against the Georgia Bulldogs. So those are the guys I wanted to talk about today on this episode of The Process. It should be a great game on this Saturday in Bryant-Denny Stadium as the Tide hosts the Georgia Bulldogs. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on our YouTube page. Be sure to hit that subscribe button below before you leave so you can stay updated on all of our content on our YouTube page. Then head over to touchdownalabama.com. Pick up your subscription today. With that subscription, you will be able to read all of our subscribe-only articles, get your hands on our yearly print magazine issue, also get a chance to read our in-depth draft projections, and along with our in-depth scouting report. So be sure to pick up your subscription to touchdownalabama.com today. Then head to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store to download the Touchdown Alabama app so breaking news notifications can be sent to your mobile device. As always, I am Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine.
The process.